The Oracle of Luna is a podcast with me, Bridget Engels, as your host. Here we have conversations with real live, present-day goddesses who are actively and courageously doing their magical work in the world. Each episode is a bewitching journey with relevant discussions on topics such as Wiccan pagan spirituality, writing, culture, magical practices, art, ritual, and the craft in its many forms. Merry meet! Welcome to another episode of the Oracle of Luna podcast. I'm Bridget Engels, your host, and today I'm extremely privileged to be a speaker along with several other wonderful presenters at the Return to the Mother Global Online Summit this November 24th and 25th. This episode is an interview with me and the organizer, Frances Billinghurst, where I discuss my sacred moon circles and moon goddess meditation books that I created over the years that honor and celebrate the sacred feminine, the goddess, and women, and the moon. The topic of my presentation is Healing the Damage of Patriarchy Through Moon Circles. All presentations are designed to offer ways to include the divine feminine into our spiritual practices. Each of us are connected to the mother in all her forms as the goddess, as feminine consciousness, and even as our planet, Mother Earth. So now relax, tune in, and be enlightened.
Hello and welcome to Return to the Mother Online Summit, where we have gathered together wisdom keepers, theologians, spiritual teachers, and inspirational speakers to share their knowledge and insight as we explore the concept of the divine feminine, goddess consciousness, and earth awareness, and whether there are any interconnecting threads as to how women and anything feminine is treated or perceived in a world that is so deeply rooted in patriarchy. My name is Frances Billinghurst. I'm your host for and the creatrix of this event, and I'm coming to you from Kaurna country here in South Australia. As such, I acknowledge the Kaurna people as being the traditional custodians of this land. So mani ngā padni, everyone. Thank you for joining me. I'm delighted to welcome Bridget Engels. Welcome, Bridget. Thank you for being part of this event.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
You're more than welcome. So for people who may not be familiar with Bridget's work, she is a Wiccan priestess, author, podcaster, ritualist, and the founder of the Circle of Luna in Seattle, a women's moon circle that's been operating since 2010. Her books and audiobooks, The Oracle of Luna, Meditations with the Moon Goddess, Volumes 1, 2, and 3, are available in both printed and also audio format across all the usual platforms, including Amazon and Audible. Bridget is the creator and the host of a magical podcast, The Oracle of Luna, Conversations with Goddesses, where she speaks with everyday goddesses from all around the world. And this podcast is also available on all major platforms. On top of all of that, Bridget is passionate about connecting with the moon and the goddess. As a priestess, she has led many public rituals, events, and ceremonies that provide spiritual connection with the divine feminine, the goddess archetypes, and the moon. So we're delighted to have Bridget here today. The title of her presentation is Healing the Damage of Patriarchy Through Moon Cycle. So again, thank you, Bridget, for joining in these discussions as we explore these interweaving threads between the absence of the divine feminine within mainstream culture, especially here in the West, of Earth or Mother Earth, of nature and goddess consciousness, And I would like to begin these discussions by first asking you to share a little bit about your own personal journey and experiencing the divine feminine, the goddess.
Thank you. It's not often I get interviewed. I'm usually on the other end interviewing other present day goddesses, so this is really exciting. I grew up in Northern California near San Francisco. Yeah, and in a large family, Catholic family, and went through the usual, schooling, CCD, church, mass, and then went when I got into art school in San Francisco, I started exploring some alternate spiritual paths. I was painting a lot, studied painting, and I started looking at Remedios Veros, who is a Mexican surrealist woman painter. And I read a book about her, and I also went to there was a lecture at the San Francisco Art Institute, and by the author of the book on Remedios Veros. And as it turns out, Remedios Veros was highly involved in tarot, numerology, magical practices, paganism. And so I was fascinated. I started reading about this. I started exploring it from that point, and it really opened up a whole new road for me because, frankly, there was a big spiritual gap between graduated from high school and into my late 20s. And so it really opened up a renaissance of exploration on a spiritual level and expanding my spiritual consciousness. So that said, I did start attending different groups. One was Daughters of the Goddess in the East Bay. And then I started with some friends of mine to hold little rituals in my little apartment. And so from there, I started working in the real world. I had to, get a job, be professional, start working. But then I realized, you know, 8 years into that I was still really missing a spiritual life. And so at that point, I had transferred to Seattle, Washington, and was living there. And I started attending a small Dianic Wiccan circle called Women of the Goddess, run by my friend and mentor, Janice Van Cleve. And I trained and was initiated as a priestess for 10 years in that circle and loved it. And, but I also explored other festivals, other circles, other covens to really expand my knowledge of what is the goddess, what is Wiccanism, how do I become spiritually fulfilled, all those questions. So I was really seeking that. And so after a while I decided to start my own circle based on the moon and all her phases, and in a more intuitive style, less formal, less hierarchical, and a lot more circle oriented, where everybody participates, everybody co-creates, everybody collaborates and has a say in the making of the ritual. So I was the leader, the priestess, running everything and organizing and facilitating. But at the same time, it was very democratic and very special and powerful. And it depends, on and off. We had probably about 13 to 20 women. Sometimes it was smaller, sometimes it was larger, depending on the moon or where the ritual was. We practice outside and inside. And all the rituals are really powerful. And yeah, so that's how I started. And then I'm currently in Las Vegas right now. And then I also was doing not only running my circle, but I was also doing public events, public rituals at different locations and different festivals or venues. So yeah, and then I started my podcast when COVID hit, which is 2020. And that really elevated my voice as far as expanding divine feminine consciousness, talking to other leaders and authors who are involved in Wiccan paganism and doing the work. They're all women. All my guests are women and female. So it's definitely from a female sacred feminine voice. And the goal is to really elevate the sacred feminine and let the goddess speak. So,
No, wonderful. And thanks for sharing that, Bridget, because
oh yeah, and I also wanted to mention that within my rituals, within my moon rituals, a big part of the ritual or a big chunk of it was a guided moon goddess meditation. So I started writing those books based on several, like hundreds of rituals performed where I had written these guided meditations. They're sitting in a stack in my living room in the corner. My friend Janice said, "Why don't you publish them?" And I'm like, "Okay, how do you do that?" I was not really a trained writer, but I self-published on Amazon, and I also narrate and produce all my audiobooks. And so that's how that started as well. So,
oh, wonderful. And then you said it's well from the other end, from also I've been a guest on your podcast. These are much needed, and even in our modern world, they're becoming more and more platforms, but women's voices still are not heard, especially in the
yeah.
context of spirituality. And I think you've
Mm-hmm.
really tapped on something. There is this definite a connection between women naturally and the moon through even our bleeding cycles. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm just wondering, because the theme of your talk is to heal us from patriarchy, from the damage of patriarchy. So, in through your experience for holding these circles, for running these circles, what have you discovered as sort of like the healing qualities when women get together? How can even a woman who's not all that spiritual, is she also able to come along and receive some healing or some insight as to how
Yeah.
patriarchy has sort of, and it's hard to define patriarchy because I think it's got its little fingers in everybody's um,
Mm. Oh
eyes,
yeah.
and there's
Mm,
so many
sure.
interpretations of it. But I'll hand
Yeah.
the platform back over to you as to some of your thoughts and advice you can give in those areas.
Well, one of the big highlights of my moon goddess group and working with women together is that we all have a say. In patriarchy, we don't have a say. We're shut down. We have to approach things in a linear, hierarchical fashion. In a circle, we're all participants, we all have a say. And so, one of the things that was special and powerful about holding women's moon circles is the healing aspect of being able to talk and express in a respectful group and then be heard. And with that comes an opening of spiritual, access to the moon, to the goddess, and it's a ripple effect. So I was experiencing while I was leading the circle is that I would see somebody come in, maybe a new participant, and then they would continue to come, and I would see the progression, the development of them as they started and weren't sure, kind of afraid, like I don't know what I'm doing, and then as they started participating and voicing and embodying the goddess and coming with something to offer with each ritual, they had a say. They had a stake in the game. They were part of the whole. And so I think patriarchy ingrained in our culture, we have to break out of that however we can. And one of the ways that I did it was with this moon circle. And it was healing on many levels because not only was it creative, it was spiritual, it was psychological, it was emotional, it was women were relating to each other as sisters, um, and not as rivalries or coworkers or just like, hey, get out of my way or what, the usual patterns in patriarchy. It changed the relationship of how we approach experience. And it was, to me, very, very powerful, and still is. I still do events, live events, and I kind of miss my Seattle. I moved away after COVID, so anyway.
Mm. No, no. Thank you for sharing. And this is something that I think a lot of people don't truly sort of realize, that our modern world, as I mentioned in the introduction, is so deeply rooted in patriarchy. And
Yeah.
I'm not talking about the sort of like women versus men attitude. It's how we perceive things. You're talking about the competition to be
Mhm.
number one, to
Yeah.
better, though there is a healthy element of competition. But this whole concept of there can only be number one as opposed to the sharing, that is
Right.
actually a patriarchal sort of trait that
Mhm.
I don't know, because you do your own circles, but I sometimes I see in, especially in some of the younger women who may not have had that experience in the knowledge base, and I'm probably being a little bit judgmental in this, there isn't that support to anybody else who may be holding a moon circle. And part of me is wondering, is that sort of like patriarchy in disguise, or that element still has its tentacle, should I say, even in some women's circles as well? Have you come across anything like that where there's
Mm.
been a competition? And if you have, how have you able to sort of, let's say, educate, but move forward from that and move
Yeah,
into a more
that's a very
matriarchal?
good question. I have had some experiences where somebody wanted to dominate the ritual, either with a personal tragedy or crisis, or just because they wanted to be a diva, or just take control of it. And I have to say, it is awkward. But as a priestess, you allow them to speak, but then you respectfully say, let's get back into ritual. We're all in this together. This is a group functionality here. Everybody has a say equally. Um, and and then eventually, if they keep coming back, that person, they get it. They're like, okay, now I understand. This is a shared experience. It's a circle, it's not hierarchical, it's non-competitive. It's for the good of everybody, for everybody's spiritual development and fulfillment. But yeah, there have been a few of those experiences, and it can be awkward. Sure.
Yes, and I think too, in I suppose working more with the women circles and the moon circles as you do, you are able to sort of gain these sort of tools that at one stage maybe we all had, but we have forgotten, or as you said, it's been so suppressed in us that we aren't able
Yeah.
to tap back into
Hmm.
sort of utilizing them in a more positive way. And I like it how you say, though there's no hierarchy, and this is another sort of misunderstanding that some people may have, there's still one person who sort of oversees. So in the background, as you said,
Sure.
as the high priest, and
As
there
a
has to be,
container. Hmm.
yes, there has to be at least one person
Yeah,
or a group of person who organizes everything.
sure.
And there's a big lesson there in, okay, I've gathered, I've provided a space, but now I step back and let everybody contribute. And that's also can be another big learning experience for a lot of people coming on from a
Yeah,
very heavily patriarchal concept.
sure. Yeah.
And you have talked about this sort of briefly on a personal level. What has connecting with the goddess, the divine feminine, and doing these moon circles done for you, if I can ask that?
Well, that's a big question because it has opened up my life radically. I have become more holistic. I understand the seasons, the cycles, the phases of the moon, how they all interrelate, how we are all part of a whole and not just, hey, I'm here, this is my agenda, you know, this is what I got to do in a linear fashion. And this has really opened my life. It's made myself feel whole on a spiritual level, on a creative level, even intellectually. It's stimulating. And also, I'm kind of an introvert. I always have been, but being in a circle and leading a circle, it really has opened me up into more ways than I can talk about, because it's really just it's it's been it's been huge for me. And yeah, so, and the podcast as well, that's also a big thing. It's
Now,
really it's gotten me out of my comfort zone, from just a follower to a leader.
and you did mention your podcast, and that was going to be my next question. So I was looking
Oh.
for a nice little segue into it, the Oracle of Luna podcast. And you have these conversations with modern day goddesses, everyday goddesses. So
Mhm.
you said this came out of COVID. What was the inspiration behind that? And now we said COVID was almost 4 years ago. You're still doing it. What's the inspiration to continue doing it?
Well, I find it fascinating and fulfilling to speak with these amazing women who are doing the work. They're not just out there talking, they're actually interesting, whole people who are elevating the sacred feminine by actively and consistently getting themselves, their voices out there, their writings, their books, their actions that have a ripple effect on society. These are the women I celebrate and I've looked at and I've always admired, and thought, you know what? I'd like to talk to them. I'd like to see what they're about and how they got to be who they are and where they are, because I'm just curious. And so I'm still curious. And I'm fascinated and astounded at the amount of amazing women, goddesses on my show, the guests that have come on and still want to come on. And you know, it's very powerful. It's in more ways than one.
Hmm.
So yeah, but it's a curious. I think it was a curiosity, like, hmm, I'm doing this and they're doing this, and I wonder how they got to be who they are. It's out of curiosity, and I feel inspired by them.
Yes, and you've had
So,
some really remarkable sort of guests on your
oh yeah,
as well. Some movers and shakers back in the, should we say, the early days of
yes,
1980s
Z
feminist.
Budapest and Ruth Barrett. Yeah, they've been on my show, and Susan Weed, and these are the early women generation.
And some of the younger women or people coming into sort of Dianic witchcraft or priestess work or the goddess today may not have heard of these sort of groundbreakers.
No,
And while they're
I
still
know.
around us, to celebrate them and also the challenges that they've had to deal with, especially right at the
Yes.
early stages.
Oh
So,
yeah, definitely. They were right there in ground zero when this started. And I was honored to chat with Z Budapest earlier in 2023, and she spoke about how she came from Hungary. She didn't have anything, and she started out there protesting, and one thing led to another, and she started her circle. She wrote her book in LA, and everything just snowballed and into this powerful movement. But she and Ruth Barrett and all the earlier women of the movement, the goddess movement, they were right there in the very beginning, and I honor that, because that they were the groundbreakers. They came from building, everything from nothing.
yes, and I think sometimes we look back and we forget what it was like, even today. What was it the world was like
Oh
before the
yeah,
from before the internet, where you had to actually write things down and go to the
sure.
library to find anything. And networking was done more sort of more physically, especially
Yes.
to find. I remember when I first started getting interested, well, when I first started hearing about the goddess, but like you, it was through a course that I'd done on Celtic mythology, and it's just like, oh, there is a divine feminine. I'd never heard of one before.
Yeah.
I'd been a big follower of myth, but I didn't connect the dots that myth had to
Right.
come from somewhere, which sort of leads into my next question. There's a lot of interpretations of goddess, the divine feminine. Um,
Mm-hmm.
is she real? Is she an archetype? Is she an energetic force? How do you see the goddess yourself?
I see the goddess as divine in all aspects. Since I'm a moon witch, I I honor the moon. I'm very much impacted by the moon phases, always have been. And so that's when I feel most connected to her in all her divinity is through the moon and leading moon circles and writing moon guided moon goddess meditations. That for me is, how I connect with the goddess. But I also have always been, even as a child, very closely attached to nature. And when we can get close to nature, that's such a special gift right there, because we understand that there's cycles, there's seasons, there's a flow, there's patterns, there's, that really in patriarchy, we're just like not even taught that. And, we're really not taught to be magical as youngsters anyway.
Mm. And I know
But
you work primarily with women, and I just want to say for the men watching this too, men have cycles as well. They're just not talked about. Men are connected with nature,
sure.
and you can see that through so just going out there. And in some pagan traditions, they talk about, in mine in particular, they talk about how the sun is a representation of the god, the divine masculine, but the moon is the representation of the
Yeah, I find
divine.
that really kind of too binary, because there are solar goddesses,
Mm.
and like Sekhmet is a solar goddess, and there's several others, and I feel like that is just a little bit too limiting. I find that there's moon goddesses, there's solar goddesses, there's just a vast, diverse group of goddesses that are have many aspects, both solar and lunar.
Yes, and in particular, the lands that I'm on, a lot of Indigenous Australians also
Mhm.
have solar goddess and actually a moon god. So we sort of like tip the sort of
Yeah,
European centric concept ideal on its head as well, which can be
yeah,
very interesting, especially when people, as you said, get too linear, get too sort of boxed into
right.
labels and terminology. And I think what I'm hearing from your discussions is that through the work that you do with the moon circles, we need to start, if we haven't already done so, get out of this linear concept of the
Absolutely.
life from birth to death, to realize that if we look at nature, everything's cyclic, just like the moon has a
Everything. Everything has a life, death, and rebirth in everything. It's an energetic pattern in all life, in anything that we do too.
Mm.
So that having that concept, that cosmology is really important and central to the divine feminine as well. So yeah.
Mm.
And I will say that there have been some men in my rituals that have joined, but and we've allowed it as sisters in the circle. We've embraced them, and but there's they just, I have to say, they just weren't that comfortable, I guess. It was just maybe it was just too much estrogen. I don't know. But I have been welcoming to men as well
Mm.
in the circle. And
Mm.
I don't know.
Yeah.
It just worked out that we're all women, have been women.
And I guess you're sort of like holding a space where it's the ball's on the other foot. And it sort of gives them a little bit of an idea how sort of uncomfortable women can feel when we walk into an arena which is
Yeah,
predominantly men. And it's just like,
sure.
and this comes to my understanding of matriarchy, is just like there shouldn't be that uncomfortable feeling, that people should be able to hold space, or if we are completely aligned with things. Again, let's come back to this competition aspect that we were talking about
Mhm.
earlier,
Yeah,
feeling uncomfortable
yeah,
and having, instead of going, I'm here to experience, let me experience, as opposed to, oh, bringing our energies and our thoughts back to me and just my little
right,
bubble. As
right, right. Yeah. So in a moon circle, it's very intuitive. There's an emphasis on intuition, and so and less mental energy. In that sense, I have to say that women find that a little bit more appealing and easy.
But well, that is sort of one of the, should I say, the gifts of the feminine, or the angles of the feminine, is the intuitive aspect, the sort of more
Mhm.
introverted, the inner power, which again reflects in with the moon, while the masculine is sort of more extrovert and needs to be more structured. But then my understanding, or my sort of view on the things, is that the two needs to come together. But that can only be done when both are sort of coming together at the same level, or and
Mhm.
as you mentioned, there's been so much suppression and oppression with relation to women, the feminine, the removal of the goddess, that
Mhm.
women need that space to sort of come back to themselves first before they
Yes.
can sort of be a little bit more
Yes.
open and accepting. And I suppose men too also need to have that space for them to sort of understand themselves, and that sort of the damage that patriarchy has actually caused to them as
Yeah.
well. So we've got
Yeah.
a lot of work to undertake to go
Yes.
forward on, but definitely having moon circles and running the moon circles for as long as you have, you would have seen a lot of sort of change and evolution, especially
Oh
with
yeah.
other people coming in, because you're offering a space, as you said, for women to be heard. And that could be
Yeah.
very confrontational or even challenging for a lot of women, that you've been giving a space to speak. And I commend you on the work that you've been doing,
Thank
and
you.
it said that it's necessary. And it's sort
Yes.
of just a general question too. Why, and I don't know if we have actually, we might have covered this, but why do you feel it is important to elevate the sacred feminine in today's world, amongst the women today, to sort of like raise them up? And especially also with your podcast, giving a platform for the women doing the work. Do you feel this is so important today?
I feel it's urgently needed that women's voices be heard for who they are and not masking behind the patriarchal guise. There's shows, there's women, other podcasters and news shows, they're women speaking all the time, but I feel like they're speaking the patriarchy. They're not talking from a matriarchal standpoint. And so this is where my podcast comes in. I've carved out a niche that I feel like is a good one, and it's needed, clearly, because I keep getting guests that are requesting to come on and talk. It's personal, it's more intuitive, it's more aligned with the goddess, it's more aligned with making a difference and trying to change the world for the better. It's been a real experience, a real journey, but I think it's much needed. It is.
Mm.
It's definitely much needed for women to talk, and particularly women in certain oppressed societies who never get a chance and live in terrible conditions and have struggled to overcome so much. We here in the US, or also in parts of Europe and the UK and maybe in Australia, I think it's a little bit different than in some third world countries and other countries where women just really don't have a voice. So
Mm. No, and also some of the guests that you've had on there are actually, you said, like yourself, modern day priestesses who are actually doing the work, who are actually performing rituals and ceremonies, some of them even taking on
yes.
tours and performing these rituals and ceremonies in
And
the
teaching classes.
and going to the places
Yeah.
which once held the ceremonies and places of divine reference to the goddess, which has been really, really fascinating to listen to, and
hmm
to be the host of it. You must have been really fascinated to actually speak to some of these fantastic women as well. So again,
Thank you. It's just very inspiring to talk with these women because I can tell they work hard and they work consistently. They're not like a flash in the pan where they're, oh, yeah, I did this for 2 to 5 years and I'm moving on to something different. They consistently keep building their spiritual practice and their voice and their books and magical offerings.
mm,
So that's really, to me, very inspiring, and I honor that about these women. So I find that powerful.
Yes, and it heightens the sort of the role of the priestess. The priestess is a vocation. We hear about priests within modern Catholicism and other Christianity and other groups, but the role of the priestess is also a vocation. And I know you're a priestess yourself. Have you ever felt a desire to, this is all too hard, I've got to, I can walk away
Well,
and do
yeah,
something
I did
else?
have to scale back as I work, like a lot of people. I have a job, and I have to do all this stuff outside of work, right? So there have been times where, hey, I just had to, give up an event that I was thinking of leading, or a workshop, or say no to a podcast. I've had to do that for sure. But that's part of life. You have to be able to juggle and balance all aspects of your life to remain healthy and,
Mm.
in body, mind, and soul.
Yes, and I think that's
So,
important for people to remember too, that maybe some of these women, these authors, these priestesses that we admire, some of them may do it full time, but some of them don't. We all have other
mhm,
obligations, even family, work, you said,
uh,
and what
sure,
we're wanting to put out in the world could be a side project to what we're actually doing to earn the money to sustain ourselves, to actually be able to do our work. And it'll be fantastic if we could
right.
all sort of step into that role. I don't know myself if my goddess centered work, if I could do that all the time, yes, that would be fantastic. But if I had to earn an income from that, I don't know how I personally feel about that, because it's sort
Yes,
of like I like the separation between my spiritual self, my spiritual work, and what I have to do to
yes,
pay the bills, sorts of things. But I don't know, I
yeah,
think that's a very
I agree.
personal.
I agree. Yeah. I think there has to be balance for sure.
Mm, mm.
Even as a
Now,
spiritual person, there has to be balance between practicality and your magical side.
yes, yes, and my hat's off to those people who can do everything as well. If they can do all that, fantastic to them. But to me, everybody's individual, and it's just like I like having that sort of, yes. My spiritual does flow into my mundane life, but I do like to have that sort of clear cut in between the two
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Bridget, unfortunately, time is getting away from with us. To sort of like talk a little bit about your books, your audio books. You did mention
Hmm.
that these books,
Yes.
Oracle of Luna, Meditations of the Moon Goddess, are based on the meditations that you had written and performed during your circles that you've run over the years.
Yes.
Three
Yes.
three volumes. Congratulations! That's a
Thank
huge
you.
volume of work.
Yes.
Is there anything else that you want to tell us about the meditations? And do you have any other volumes up your sleeve as well?
I have some things brewing. I just finished recording and narrating my third audiobook, which is based on my third volume about lunar eclipses. Lunar eclipses are very powerful threshold and portal. So it's kind of a different book compared to the other two books, but they're all these meditations are to provide inner healing and a connection to the goddess within. And so each of these meditations, whether it be with Baba Yaga or Persephone or Inanna or Sekhmet, they all connect us to a divine feminine source. And my hope is that with each of these meditations, a person can go within, go into a theta brain state, and get some healing and get some goddess divine feminine connection. That's what it's about. And in my rituals that I led with Circle of Luna, I was consistently getting great feedback and how powerful these meditations were. I've always been a creative person. Even when I was young, I loved to do creative writing. I was also a painter, so I'm very visual. Using imagery, using sound, goddess embodiment, it can be very healing. And so yeah, I've this third audiobook I've been doing narrated it as well. And so I found myself embodying the goddess while I was narrating. And so that was something different. That was more on the, ooh, where'd that come from? And a little surprising, but very stretched my capacity for creativity and also connection, goddess connection. So very proud of the work. I had just submitted it to ACX, and they're in the process of looking at the sound editing and sound quality. So yeah, so that's a big thing that I've been working on for 4 months this year. So
Wow, fantastic! Congratulations.
thank you.
And
Yeah,
and your podcasts we mentioned earlier. It's available on sort of and
everywhere.
Apple everywhere, and
Apple, Spotify,
I'll put
Listen Notes, all the major Podchaser, Google, Pandora,
yeah,
Amazon Music, all
I'll
of
put
them.
a I'll put a few links below this recording, as well as
Okay.
also a few links to your books and your audiobooks for anybody who's
Oh, thank you.
watching this interview and would like to know
Thank you.
more, especially some of the groundbreaking women that you have, or goddesses you have interviewed
Yeah.
in your podcast. And I do notice that every so often on your podcast you also share some meditations as well in relation to the moon.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, I sprinkle them in.
that is wonderful. So again, Bridget, we're running out of
Yeah.
time. So I would like to thank you very much for
Thank
all the
you.
wisdom that you've shared with us
This has
today.
been fun. Thank you.
And as you said, being a podcaster, it's interesting to have the ball on the other foot, to be
Yeah,
interviewed.
yeah,
Just
it's very special when you get to talk about yourself. So, yeah, I appreciate that. It's been an honor. Thank you.
that's all right. I'm honored to be able to provide a space for you to share your work,
Yeah.
because your work is much needed. And your podcast, I love your podcast. I'm a little bit biased. I've also, just a disclosure, I've actually
You've
been
been a
interviewed.
guest on my podcast. Yes.
Yes, and it was just wonderful meeting and connecting with you and following you
Thank
also
you.
on
Thank
your
you.
social media feeds as well. So if this
Thank you.
resonates with anybody who's listening to this or watching this, please check out Bridget and her work, and all her links will be given below. So as we wrap up, to everybody who's watching, thank you, and I hope you have enjoyed this discussion with Bridget as much as I have, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Blessings.
Thank you. Blessed be.